Hi guys, in this video I'm going to talk about variables. Basically tensors and operation objects in Tensorflow, they are immutable. That means that they don't change as time goes on. But machine learning tasks by their nature need a mechanism to save changing values over time. In Tensorflow, this is done by using variable objects, which contain mutable tensor values that persist across multiple calls to session.run. When you create a variable, you pass a tensor as its initial value to the variable constructor. Here's an example. So this is a variable constructor, and this is a variable constructor, and this is the tensor. This second argument is an optional argument, and it's going to be the name of the variable. Once you create a variable, it can be used anywhere that a tensor can be used. So variables can be used in TensorFlow functions or operations, and if you do that, its present value will be passed on to that operation. So let's take a look at this example. This is my var, which I just created over here. This is a variable, and I'm using it inside an addition operation. So I'm adding it with 5, and the resulting tensor will be stored in this tensor. Here's another example. This is my variable, which I just created over here, and I'm multiplying it by 8 to create this mul tensor. So let's do this in TensorFlow. Documents, variable, constructor .py, import TensorFlow as tf. Now my var is tf.variable, probably with a cap v, and the initial value, let's say, is 4, and name is my var. Let's use it inside an operation to create a new tensor. tf.add, let's say Alright, so to see the result, we need to create a session. tf.session with a cap s, and put it inside SESS. Now in here, this is empty, which means that I'm using the default graph. So we'll cover this later on, but for this, alright, so let's see. So I want to go to my documents and variable constructor. Python Okay, so let's see. Okay, alright, so let's go back to the code and I'll try to explain it. So this is just creating a session, and I need to run for every variable. When I want to use it in a session, I need to initialize it, and this is the initializer attribute of this variable. This basically calls this basically initializes this variable into its initial value, and after that I call evaluation of my variable, my var, inside this session, right? And what I can do over here, I can do the same thing for, let's say, this one. And let's change this some more. Alright, so it should print 3 things for me. Alright, 4932, which looks okay. Okay, so this is how you initialize a variable, and this is how you use that variable just like a tensor. So when you do that, it will put the current value of that variable inside the operation to create a new tensor. Alright, so let's get back to the slides. Oftentimes the initial value of variables will be large tensors of zeros, ones, or random variables. To create these types of variables, Tensorflow offers some helpful operations such as tf.zeros, tf.ones, tf.randomNormal, and tf.randomUniform. So the output of these functions are tensors, and they can be used as initial values for variables. So here's an example over here for zeros. So this is going to be a 3 by 2 matrix of all zeros, and this is going to be a vector of length 4 of all ones. This example is going to generate random uniform numbers, a 4 by 4 matrix of random uniform numbers. So the minimum value is going to be 0 and maximum value is going to be 10. So these random numbers will be generated in this range, and the output will be this tensor, and then you can use this tensor to create a new variable. So this one will create a random matrix of 4 by 3 by 2 with the mean of 0 and standard deviation of 3. So we can do these inside TensorFlow. So let's do this. Alright, so import TensorFlow as tf. Zeros is equal to tf dot zeros of, let's say, 3 and 3. Ones is going to be tf dot ones of, let's say, that's 4, and random uniform is going to be tf dot random uniform of, let's say, 2 by 2, and min val, this is equal to 0, and max val is equal to, let's say, 10. Now again, to evaluate the output of these tensors, we need to create a session. So let's call this tf.session. Now because I don't have any variables, I'm just going to run this session. Let's run, and then I can evaluate these tensors. I can also do it like this. This should be okay, and print the output. So let's see, zeros, variable zeros and ones. Okay, so this, only this file changes. Variable, let's see, tab, zeros, zeros. Let me see, variables zeros and ones, variables, hit tab, hit enter. Alright, so it's giving me an output. Let me see, zeros, 3 by 3 matrix of zeros. So I can do the same thing for all of others. And let me do the same thing for random uniform. So if I run this, it will give me all of the values for all of these tensors. Alright, looks okay. So what I can do is I can send these values as initial tensor for variables. So let me do that. Var is equal to tf dot variable, and I can send zeros. And that's it. So I'm just going to put it over here. Now for me to be able to evaluate this variable, I need to run its initializer first. Okay, so in here, let's run dot initializer. Now I can evaluate it just like any other tensor. Oh, this is not how you do it. Var dot eval and session is sess. Let me get rid of these just to see the output of the variable. And so this should work. Alright, working. Nice. Now you could have directly sent the output of the operation inside the variable constructor. So let's do this in Python. So what I mean over here is something like this. Copy this part, and instead of this tensor name, you could just do this. Okay, so, and it will give you the same result. Alright. And by the way, this is truncated normal, which does not generate extreme values in the normal distribution. Variable initialization. So we are already familiar with the initializer. This is basically so this is an operation which you need to run it inside the session, and it basically initializes the value of this variable w. Alright, so when you launch the graph, variables have to be explicitly initialized before you can run operations that use their values. You can initialize a variable by running its initializer operation, just like we did in the previous codes, and just like this code. Variable objects live inside the graphs, just like most other TensorFlow objects, but their state is actually being managed by a session. So that's why whenever we run a session, we run the initializer of the variable, and this is an extra step when you compare it with tensors. So in the previous examples, we saw how to initialize one variable using its initializer attribute, but that method would be a huge pain if we have more than one variable, multiple variables. So there is this convenient function, this one, initialize all variables, that initializes all of the variables inside the graph, so you don't have to do them one by one. And so here is an example. Init op, so this will contain the operator, and this is the function call, and then you would launch the graph in a session. So this is the default graph, and then you would run like this, session.run initial operation, and now you can evaluate variables, or you can update them. So let's do this in Python. Let's save this. Let's call it initialize all .py. So import Tensorflow as tf. Now init op tf.initialize all variables. Now let me create two variables over here. My var1 is going to be tf.variable with a cafe and 4 and without a name. We copy this to, let's say, 5. Alright, so this is my initializer for all of the variables, and now I need to create a session. tf.session with a cap s with default graph. Now I need to run the initializer. Let's run this operator, operation to be precise. Alright, so now I can evaluate my variables. So let me evaluate my var.eval. So because I don't have a default session, I need to specify it. Now the output of this will be 4 because I haven't changed it, and I want to print it. Alright, so this should run. Okay, let's go to terminal, and now this should, what was the name, initialize or something like that. Right, so let's see. Right, 4. and that was expected. Let's take a look at the other variable. Four and 5. Alright, looks good. Okay, so we know how to initialize all of the variables inside the graph. So let's go to the next slide. Changing variables. In order to change the value of the variable, you can use the variable.assign method. So the input argument will be the new value of that variable. Note that variable.assign is an operation. This means that it must be run inside a session. Alright, so here's an example. So I've created this variable with an initial tensor of 0. Now this is my assign operator, and what this does is basically increments the variable by 2. So this operation increments the value of the variable by 2. And I'm going to initialize all variables. This is my operation to initialize all variables. And now I'm going to start a session. SCSS is equal to tf.session. And now I need to initialize all of the variables using this init operation. And after that, I need to run my incrementation operation. So this is my var plus 2, my var plus 2. So the output, because the initial value is 0, the output should be 2. So let's do this inside Tensorflow. So what do I call this? Increment by 2. Right, so let's save this. Increment by 2 .python. Import Tensorflow as tf. Now what I want to do, I want to create a variable. My var is equal to tf dot variable with a cap v and 0 as initial tensor value. Now after that, I would want to create this operation which increments the variable by 2. So let's call it increment by 2 is equal to my var dot assign my var plus 2. So this is my operation, and let me create the initialization operation. Init is tf dot initialize all variables. Right, so now I need the session tf dot SESS is equal to tf dot session with a cap s and with the default graph. Because this is empty, it means that I'm using the default graph. And now I need to run it with the initializer. Run. Now if I evaluate this, print evaluate my variable before the operation dot eval. Now because my session is not default, I need to give it a session explicitly. Now I want to run the other operation, incrementation by 2. Now I want to evaluate it again and print its value. Alright, so it should print 0 and then print 2. So increment by 2. Let's go to terminal. Hit tab. 0 and 2 looks nice. So we know how to change variable values, which is good. So this is an example of the wrong way to do it, as I mentioned. So this assign, where is it? So this assign is an operation, so it needs to be run. In this example, it's not being run inside the session, so that's why this is the output 0 and 0, because it's not actually run. And this is how you would change that. So you would run the initializers for all variables, and then you would put that assign into an operation and then you would run it. If you do that, you will get this result, 0 and 1, which is the desired result. So you know how to increment, you know how to generally change the value of a variable, but there are specialized increment and decrement functions or operations, to be specific, in TensorFlow. So this is assign add, which increments by this value, and you can run it in a session. And there's also this assign sub, which decrements by the input value, and you can also run this inside a session. Let's try this. Let me sass.run myvar dot assign add of, let's say, 3, and then I'm going to print it. So it should print out 0, 2 and 5. Let's see. Alright, looks okay. So assign underscore sub is similar. You can also so you can run variables in different sessions. Different copies of the same variable will be kept in different sessions, so you can run them independently. So this is an example. So you can run this, you create this session 1 and session 2, and then you create this so you have this myvar, and you've initialized it as 0, and this is your initialization operation. And now you, for session 1, you run its initializer for the whole thing, and then you so once you do this, you don't need to run the initializer for myvar, because this takes care of everything. So initialize every variable, and then you increment myvar by 1, so the output should be 1. If you do the same thing in session 2, it's actually using a different copy of myvar. So it will, so you're initializing it and then incrementing by 2, the output should be 2. But here is the important part. So now if you do it in session 1, now in session 1 the output was so the current value of my var was 1. If you increment it by 5 you would get 6. If you do it in session 2 you will, if you increment by 2 in session 2 you will get 4, because in session 2 my var is 2 right now. Alright, so let's do it in Python. Let's save it. Different sessions .py, import Tensorflow as tf. Session with the default graph, and let's do the same thing for SESS2. Run with the initializer, which initializes everything, which is just this my var. Now we want to evaluate this. Print that my var dot eval with the session as SESS1. So right, let's do the same thing for session 2. And session 2. I also need to initialize it for session 2. So in here, let me change this to 2. So let's try this one, different sessions. Alright, so I'm getting 1 and 2, which is okay so far. Session 1.run. I want to see the output. Alright, so because I'm doing this in session 1 and my session 1 evaluation is 1 and incrementation by 5, it should give me 6 over here. But in here, my current value is 2. I'm incrementing it by 2, it should give me 4. Alright, so let's see. Yep. So this is how you run the same variable in different sessions. Trainable variables. So later on we will learn about optimizer classes, which automatically train our models. These optimizers by default are allowed to change values of variable objects. Mostly this is what we want, but if you don't want the optimizer to change your variables, you need to set their trainable parameter to false when creating them. So this is an example. So I'm creating this variable called non-trainable var using its constructor. So this is initial tensor value, and I'm setting its trainable attribute to false. Alright, so this is it for this video. In the next video I'm going to be covering name scopes for graphs. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.